What is going on, all you Pokemon collecting maniacs out there? This is Ryan, the PikaPikaPaPa, and in the beginning of last year, I had this wild idea of let me see if I could come up with a way to create maybe my own Pokemon index funds, right? And these aren't exactly index funds. We don't have anybody who's managing these. We don't have anybody who's buying things that now fit the index and selling the things out that don't fit the index anymore. No. What it ended up being in the long run is just an aggregate of a group of cards or sealed products or even individual sets that we've tracked the price movement of over time, and it has been just absolutely fascinating to see how this has played out. And if these were individual funds that you could buy, it's been really interesting and really exciting to see the rate of returns that you would have been able to capitalize on as you go through this process, as these individual sets or indexes or groups of cards, whatever you want to call them, have grown or declined in value over time. Yes, not all of them are up and to the right. Some of these have actually come down in value. Now, most of these are ones that I started in the beginning of 2023. However, I made the commitment that every single year I was going to drop some of the ones that weren't showing a lot of promise or ones that not a lot of people found interest in, and I was going to add in some additional ones. So you'll see some, very few, I think there's 3 of them that I started in January of 24, and most of these come from last year, from 2023. Now, what individual groups of cards or indexes are we going to be looking at today? So we're going to be looking at VSTAR Universe PSA 10s. I started that in January of this year because everybody was frothy excited about VSTAR Universe. So I said, hey, why don't we track the value of these PSA 10s, because VSTAR Universe has had a ton of grading activity, and it's been interesting to watch how that has gone ahead and played out. We also, very coolly, in the beginning of last year, we started an index on the top Sword and Shield alt arts, and as you can imagine, that has been really fun to watch, and that's the very last slide, and I can't wait to share that with you. We also started Japanese booster boxes, specifically from the years 2021 and 2022. That's another really cool index. I've been obsessed with Roaring Skies ever since I started this channel, so of course when I did this, I started an index around the Roaring Skies top 20 singles cards. I did the same thing for Lost Origin. And then I have a Charizard Ultimate Index where I look at the 15 biggest and baddest Charizard cards out there. That's the very first one we're going to talk about. And I did the same thing for Japanese Pikachu cards, because those were some cards that had all kinds of cool alternates, all kinds of cool promos. So we started that as well because you all gave me that input. We also do Sword and Shield booster boxes and Pokemon Center exclusive ETBs. Now, the reason I came up with this was because we all love collecting, but we don't all have an unlimited amount of space, right? We all want booster boxes. We all want ETBs. My God, these ultra premium collection boxes just get bigger and bigger with every iteration. So the thought process behind this was, hey, listen, maybe you buy one of these products and you keep it on a display shelf, but you could have access to the future price appreciation or decline depending on how things go if you were able to invest some of your money into an index, right? The other thing that we've understood over the long course of time, it's really hard to pick that number one card. It's really hard out of a sea of awesome Pokemon cards to pick the one that's going to give you the biggest and the baddest returns, right? So when you invest in an overall bucket or index of cards, that gives you some downside protection. It gives you a little bit of growth of all of them, and it helps balance things out. And we're going to see some examples throughout this video where that has been really, really beneficial. And the other thing that was really cool about this was, hey, maybe you want some exposure to that, 1999 first edition Charizard in a PSA 9 case, but you don't have $24,000 to spend on it right now, or there's any number of cards, especially in that Japanese Pikachu list as well. There's a ton of cards which, hey, maybe we all want some exposure to. We believe in the long-term price appreciation of them, but you don't have the money to own the card in its entirety. So through an index like this, you could get a small piece of it just by owning a share of the stock that holds all of them in together. And then the other thing that I thought was really cool is, at least for me, there can be a way to separate collecting from investing. I am always torn between those two worlds. I love collecting Pokemon cards, but obviously I also view it as an investment. I could have my collection at home, which I show off and I love, and then if I see certain indexes, which I've said in the past, like, hey, I could throw a ton of money at that and just watch it grow over time. So there was a whole bunch of reasons why I stood this up. I think we have some really cool things to look at, and again, there's some fantastic lessons to take from this as we go through the entire list. And before I get into that, I will say, out of all the videos that I do, this is one I put a ton of work into. So if you've been watching this channel and you enjoy the content, I would appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. If you like what you see in this video specifically, give us a thumbs up, and if you have questions or comments, drop them down below. I appreciate you more than I can say. This is going to be a longer video, but I promise it's going to be super cool, so I hope you can stick with me the whole time. Now, let's get into the things that I'm talking about here. So as I said, I do this Charizard Ultimate Index Fund, and this is just a high-level view of how I started this back in the month 5 of 2023, right? So I took the 15 highest valued English Charizard cards according to Pokedata.io, but what I also wanted to make sure was that they were graded by PSA, because when you're looking at something like this, obviously you're in this for the investment side of things, and I thought that PSA graded cards gave us the best opportunity to kind of secure these as investments. However, I also wanted to apply a couple rules to it, okay? So I wanted PSA 10s. However, if a PSA 10 had a value of greater than $10,000, I went down to a PSA 9 version of that card, simply because I didn't want individual cards to have the majority of the weight of the overall index, right? So obviously if we did a Charizard base set first edition in PSA 10, that would overtake the majority of the card and almost all the value would be assigned to that singular card, right? So I pulled that out and I went ahead with the PSA 9 on that one. And the other thing that I did too was I had to make sure that the cards had a population of greater than 200, because again, if this was a real index fund, you'd want to be able to buy and sell out of it. So those were the parameters that I put in place, and these were the cards that I came up with, okay? And these were the original prices when I started this in 2023, which is really, really cool. So now we're going to go ahead and take a look and see how that fund has fared since then. So here are the list of cards. In green, that's the price, okay, that they were in 2023. And then in orange in the middle is the PSA grade that it came in. And then in blue is the new price. I pulled it on the 2nd of this month. It takes me a while to get these spreadsheets all together, so it took me a while to actually get the video put together, but here it is. And then you can see the change in price right there. So the way this works is you have an equal percentage of each and every card. First I thought maybe we could do an equal dollar amount of every single card. So for example, if there's 10 cards in the index and you want the index to be, each share to be $1,000, you could do $100 worth of each card. But then the cards at the very top, it kind of devalued them, and the cards at the bottom, you had an over index into them. So I just did an even percentage of every single card. So you can see over on the far right column, that's an even percentage split. That's the growth that you've seen by each card, and that gives you the overall growth. So from the beginning of 2023 until now, pretty recently, 7/2, this index has gone up by 19.7%. You have a 20% gain on this index, which is absolutely incredible. Now, I talked about how spreading your money out across multiple cards can give you a little bit of a downside protection. Well, when you look at this list of Charizard cards, 6 of the 15 are actually down over the last 14 months. So really almost half of the total cards on this list are down. However, the cards at the very top, that Charizard Secret from Skyridge, right? The Charizard Holo base set from the Shadow List, and then the first edition in a PSA 9, right? Like those have all been performing really well. So those cards have kind of minimized all of the downness that you see in some of the other cards. Now, what I did is there's 9 different indexes in here. So I rated each one which has had the highest rate of return since we started this. And this one, ever since the beginning, ever since 2023, has yielded the 4th highest rate of return. And I'll say this now, take it with a grain of salt, because some of these indexes that have the biggest rates of returns are some that have seen the biggest growth in the last couple months. Spoiler alert, you might see the alt art one here later on in the video at the very top, right? But the other thing that I include when I'm going through these list by list is where was this at last quarter? So last quarter when I did this video, this index right here had a growth of 16.8%. Well, now it has a growth of 19.7%. So it has actually grown in value over the last quarter, which I think is really, really cool. And I've heard sometimes from some people that, hey, you know, vintage cards, the prices are kind of stuck. They're not going to grow over time. Well, I think this is one way to show that, listen, if you invest in certain cards, or at least in a basket of cards, you know, some will go up, some will go down. That's how all markets are. Nothing's ever upwards and to the right forever. But if you're able to invest in high quality cards in high grades from some of the biggest and the baddest in the Pokemon space, I certainly think you have a very, very strong opportunity for price growth over time. Now, the one card that has actually dropped the most on this list is that Dark Charizard Holo from Team Rocket. And what is interesting to me is we all know that there's a Glory to Team Rocket set that's going to be coming out relatively soon in the future. So if that set starts to get excited, if people start going after Team Rocket sets, hey, listen, this card in a PSA 10 holder is actually down 17% from when I started this index in 2023. So this could be a buying opportunity. And now again, I don't have the kind of money to go out and splash the cash on a PSA 10, but typically we see raw cards and graded cards kind of move in lockstep. So if this card gets hot, it might be a really cool opportunity to take a look at this, especially like I said, with that Glory to Team Rocket set coming out sometime in the future. Now, next set right here is that Pikachu set that I was talking about. So we took the 15 biggest and baddest Japanese Pikachu Pokemon cards, and I have them on the list right here. And I will say, when you start your index, it matters, right? Because that's your jumping off point. And we started this in January of this year. And if you've seen my grading card report videos, you know that grading was at an all-time high. Like Japanese interest was at an all-time high in January of this year. So guess what? A lot of these cards started off not at their all-time highs, but certainly at very frothy evaluations valuation point. So that definitely matters. Now, this one, unfortunately, out of the 9 indexes we're going to look at, this one is actually ranked number 8 out of 9 because it is down 6.3% since January when I started tracking this. Now, it is actually an accelerated path of decline because last quarter when we looked at it, it was basically flat. It was down 0.1%. So over the last 3 months, we have seen these awesome Pikachu cards from Japan, which are just incredible from an artwork perspective and super unique and super amazing. And I think that they hold this incredible value because, gosh, even me over here in the US, even somebody who's not that into Japanese cards, I'm not into cards that I can't read, even I want almost every single card that's on this list. So in the long run, I think they're going to be just fine, but it does kind of speak to the cyclical nature of things. Now, the card that has dropped the most here is that Battle Fiesta card, which is just really incredible because as far as I'm concerned, it's an XY promo and it's an absolute stunner right there. Look, you got my man Gengar right there in the very front. You got Pikachu who's going crazy. Like, I love this card, but it is down a significant percentage, actually 40% since we started tracking this card in January. It's not necessarily a rare card, but it's also not in a super high population. There's 1,374 of them in PSA 10, so it'll be interesting. Again, remember, the Pokemon market tends to be very cyclical, so this might just be a downturn for Japanese cards, which might mean it's a buying opportunity for some future price appreciation. The next set that we looked at right here, this is the Sword and Shield Booster Box Index, and as you might imagine, this index has performed very, very well over the last quarter, and certainly ever since we started this in the beginning of 2023. And my big takeaway and what was really cool for me was to look at 14 short months ago, look at the prices of those booster boxes. I mean, 14 months is not a long period of time. And Evolving Skies at sub 400, right? You've got Chilling Reign at $144. You got Fusion Strike at $142. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. It is just fascinating to see 14 months ago where these Sword and Shield booster box prices was. Obviously, that new price right there on 7.2, you can see Evolving Skies up to 700. Chilling Reign and Fusion Strike have had absolute huge gains. But the interesting thing too is we always talk about sealed product increases over time, and it absolutely will. But a set like Vivid Voltage is actually down 2% over that period in time. Sword and Shield is only up 1%. Rebel Clash is only up 1%, right? And then when you buy in Matters, because I think it was Lost Origin and Brilliant Stars and Silver Tempest, right? They're at very interesting points in their release cycle then. So we haven't seen those kind of price gains. This is something as we continue to monitor it over time, it's going to be fascinating to see how high is for all of these. And I have been saying when we had seen this flat and really low, I was like, this is an index that I would have been dumping money in the whole time. I never would have hesitated to dump a ton of money into this. Now, the other thing that I think is pretty cool is you've got Lost Origin, you've got Brilliant Stars, and you've got Astral Radiance. And the interesting thing is all of those booster box prices are really lumped in close together. I think for a long time I felt like Lost Origin and Brilliant Stars were kind of like in that upper echelon, and they absolutely are. But Astral Radiance has really crept its way up there. So it's going to be interesting to see which one of these three or which two of these three end up kind of taking the top reins and really separating themselves from the rest. But this index is going to be a ton of fun to watch over the next couple quarters. So if for no other reason, this is certainly a way, or at least one way, to keep your eye out for what's moving on in the Pokemon hobby is this video right here, because I think it's going to be super cool to see how it all flushes out. Now, the next ones right here, while we're staying on the booster box thing, was the 2022 and 2021 Japanese booster box. And this was one when I first started doing this. Again, I started this in 2023. For the first couple quarters, this index was absolutely insane. The price gains were nuts. I mean, it was up 20, 30%. It was absolutely crazy. But what has happened is the prices have come back down on a lot of these booster boxes. And in full transparency, this is the hardest data for me to get. So I literally go set by set. I go to eBay, I type it into the search function, I look for last sold, and those are the prices that I use to come up with the new price there in that 7.2 column. So a lot of work went into pulling this in because I want to make sure that the data is valid and I want to make sure that the data is right, especially when we see a group like this that has dropped so much. So this ranks number 5 out of the 9 indexes on here at a growth of 7% ever since we started it in 2023. But I will say that is a huge drop from last quarter. Last quarter, this was up 30% versus our jumping off point. So to go from plus 30 to plus 7 is a huge constriction of value there for these Japanese booster boxes. Now, what I was going to say is what's really interesting is you see a lot of the downfall comes from these newer sets. Really from VMAX, Climax on is where you see the price starting to come down a bit. So I know that the Japanese side of things, they have been very transparent and open about their willingness to print to demand. So I think that there's just more of this product out there than we initially thought when we were going through that big Japanese hype cycle. So interesting to see that it's coming down. It's still up 7%. Again, sealed booster boxes, it's really hard to go wrong. So even though it came down from plus 30% last quarter to plus 7% now, listen, still solid gains. Not as good as the English Sword and Shield booster boxes, but again, we're not really comparing the same things here. So lots of cool learnings, lots of cool takeaways from this. And again, remember the cyclical nature of everything. It'll be interesting to see if this comes back around from the dark side of the moon and finds the sun again relatively soon. Next thing we were looking at is I decided at that point in time we were going to look at the Lost Origin top 20 singles cards. Now, you know I do all kinds of videos on top 20 singles cards. I chart their prices over time. I always look for any kind of indicators to let us know where we can find opportunities in the singles markets, and I think we've been able to do a really good job of that in the past. But this was fascinating to me to start off looking at this. Now, the biggest takeaway for me is I looked at the prices of where this started off in 2023. Now, this one right now, this index rate's number 6 out of the 9 with only up 1%. Again, if you had bought this index, if you had invested in this mythical, not even existent index of Lost Origin top 20 cards in 2023, you would only be up 1%. However, last quarter, when we looked at this, it was actually down 20%. So it has rebounded significantly. But if you look at it, if you look where all of the gains are coming from, it is all coming from that Giratina V. I mean, if you look all the way down, this thing is an absolute bloodbath. Most of the cards in the top 20 have dropped 20, 30, 40% for some of them, which is an absolute big takeaway for me. When I'm looking at some of these newer cards and I'm trying to understand where to put my money, getting outside of the top 5 sure seems to be pretty risky, at least for right now. The other thing that I thought was really cool is over there, I have it listed on the left-hand side. Those are actually where they were in the top 20 ranking. On the right, I have the new rankings right there. So if we were to re-rank these in these same cards, where would they stand? And you see that there's 5 or 6 of these cards that wouldn't even be in the top 20 anymore. So I think that was a really cool takeaway for me as well. And again, if this was a real index fund, we would sell the ones that aren't in the top 20 anymore and we would buy the ones that are in the new top 20. But I don't have time for that. So we're just sticking with these and we're going to see how they perform over time. But it was a really cool lesson for me, and it's interesting to see the Giratina be able to carry the rest of these singles cards to get it at least into the positive space versus where it was last quarter, down 20%. My God, that was absolutely insane. Now, the next set we're talking about right here is going to be the Roaring Skies Singles Index, okay? And I have been low-key obsessed with Roaring Skies ever since I started this channel. When I talk about things that I felt have been crazy undervalued, it has been Roaring Skies. The booster box was crazy undervalued, the singles cards were crazy undervalued, and this index has performed really, really well, to be honest with you. This actually comes in at number 2 out of the 9 different indexes that are on here, with up 45% since we started this in 2023. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that, right? Like, I think that one of the things that we could take away is this had a really low jumping off point. Look at that full art M Rayquaza EX. So when we started this was obviously Roaring Skies from the EXY era, which was a relatively old set. Rayquaza had a lot of momentum going on from the Evolving Skies set, and the card was only $59. So I just kept saying, hey, I feel like there's just too much awesomeness in this set. It is super undervalued, and that card has performed admirably, right? Up 155%. It went from $59.40 when we started this all the way up to $152 today. Absolutely crazy. But the interesting thing too is we know that megas are going to be back into the gameplay. So we all think that mega evolutions will probably work their way back into the game itself. So we are seeing some of these cards that have mega evolutions on them, the older ones, maybe start to appreciate in value because people are anticipating that. I did a whole video on it a couple weeks ago or maybe a month ago, but that was really interesting to see the ones that have already popped off and the ones that have yet to pop up, because there might be some value in there as well. Speaking of that Rayquaza card, I thought it would just be really cool to talk about this and show it. When we talk about an index like this, it would have taken a long time to realize the gains, right? Remember, I started this 14 months ago, and you'll see that for most of the year, this has been relatively flat. But guess what? Over the last couple months, this card has absolutely popped off, up to $161 this morning when I pulled it. Goodness golly almighty, this card is absolutely on fire, and Roaring Skies is doing really, really good with a 45% gain. Absolutely insane. Love it. Very excited to see it. Now, the next one that we're going to talk about right here is that VSTAR Universe PSA 10 Index. And again, as I've said, it matters when you start. We started when all of these cards were really close to a high. We started when these cards were really, really hyped up. Everybody was in love with Japanese cards. The trainer cards were going through the roof. The list goes on and on and on and on. So I won't necessarily say it's fair. This index is in last place right now. It is number 9 out of 9. It is down 24% since we started it in January. But it's also declined quite a bit since last quarter. Last quarter it was down 5%. Now it's down 24%. So the bleeding seems to continue. Now, VSTAR Universe, if you watch the grading report videos, you'll know that VSTAR Universe is the most graded set pretty much outside of the 1999 game that I have ever seen. There's over 400,000 PSA cards graded from VSTAR Universe, which is absolutely crazy. Now, I will say this, the list of cards, the breadth and depth of the awesomeness of cards in VSTAR Universe plays a part in that, right? Some sets only have 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 cards that are worthy of being graded, so that's going to affect it. VSTAR Universe has tons and tons and tons of cards that are worthy of being graded, which we'll look at just a second. So that plays a part in it too. But when you look at the actual cards, like there's more to it than just that. I promise. These individual cards, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of these chase cards that have been graded. So it's very interesting. Unfortunately, only one of the cards is up since we started this in January. So just overall, the cards are starting to soften a little bit. Now, that is not to say that these aren't fantastic cards to have in your personal collection. That doesn't say that this isn't a great time to pick up some of these cards because the artwork is absolute fire. I mean, look at these. You know that Elisa Sparkle. I am in love with that. That Mewtwo V-Star. Don't forget that here in the US, the promo cards from that Charizard Ultra Premium collection, those are actually in the VSTAR Universe set. Then, of course, you got the Giratina, the gold one down there. You got that special Pikachu card. I mean, don't get me wrong. This set is absolutely awesome. So outside of the prices, I think there's some beautiful cards, and I certainly think that there's a lot of opportunity here. Are they going to appreciate huge over time? That's yet to be determined, but I will say this, there's beautiful cards in here, and you can do far worse than picking up some of these cards for the personal collection. Next one right here is the Pokemon Center exclusive Elite Trainer box, and what I'm going to do next year is I'm going to break it up into the Scarlet and Violet set and then the Sword and Shield set because I've been adding in the Scarlet and Violet ones as they come out, but guess what? I want to break it off and look at it individually. Now, this one has not performed well. This is ranked number 7 out of 9. It's actually down 0.5% since we started this, and most of the gains are coming from the very top, right? When you look at this right here, most of your gains are coming from the Scarlet and Violet era. The Sword and Shield era is not seeing a lot. Matter of fact, when we started this series in 2023, those prices were super high for a lot of these Pokemon Center exclusive ETBs. I mean, Fusion Strike was at $73. Silver Tempest was at $73. I mean, you look at Pokemon Go was at $72. Lost Origin was at $67, right? And they just aren't there. They're still available at MSRP on the Pokemon Center. So I don't think that the Sword and Shield side of things will have any opportunity for significant price appreciation until they sell out on the Pokemon Center. Then maybe we'll see some growth. But we'll just have to maintain it and take a look at it as it is up until then. But overall, the set is down. I'm still very bullish on my Pokemon Center exclusive Elite Trainer boxes in the Scarlet and Violet era. I still buy multiple cases for every new set. I still think they're going to be great in the long run. And as you can see, there's been some significant gains up there, especially thinking about most of these aren't even a year old. Absolutely crazy. They sell out. They don't come back in stock. Big fan of these for long-term investments. Now, the next one right here and the final one we're going to talk about is the top 20 Sword and Shield alt arts, and this was really interesting for me because obviously this has gone absolutely nuts, okay? This is the number 1 ranked out of the 9 indexes that we're looking at. However, if you were to look at this 3 months ago, last quarter, guess what? This index was actually down 9% versus where it started off in 2023. And there's some really powerful lessons in there for me to think about, right? I did a video not long ago on Scarlet and Violet illustration rares. We talked about how a lot of them are really frothy. The prices are going up. People seem to be really excited in them. They're actually performing fundamentally different than we typically see in the beginning of an era. We usually see this Pokemon pop and flop, and for most of these, not seeing a lot of flop, and we're seeing a whole lot of pop. But to see these awesome Sword and Shield cards that we all knew were awesome, that we all knew were going to do great over time back on 2023, and to see them be down 9% 3 months ago, and now to see them up 51% over the last 3 months is absolutely crazy. It just goes to show you that there's going to be highs, there's going to be lows. No matter how great these cards are, you're just going to have to ride the wave. You know, the people who do the best in this hobby are the ones who are patient. The reason that I've been able to build my stockpile and my sports card and Pokemon card is because I buy, I hold, and I rarely, if ever, sell. I am patient beyond all means. If the market starts to rotate, I don't panic, I don't sell. If it's rotating out of something that I really love, then guess what? I buy more of it because I have a feeling that if I'm buying the right stuff in the long run, it is going to give me some strong price appreciation. So this was a really cool lesson here on the alt arts. It was fascinating to see how they've all planned out. And again, as I said, when you think about Scarlet and Violet, the cards here in Sword and Shield that have seen the biggest price appreciation are these 4 right here. Going back to 2023, these 4 right here have all doubled in price. These are the only ones that have doubled in price. And again, not that these cards aren't great, not that these aren't big chase cards. 3 of them come from Evolving Skies, but they're not the top. It's not the Rayquaza, it's not the Moonbreon, it's not the Giratina, right? It's not the Gengar, right? These cards have seen the biggest price appreciation. So when I'm thinking about where I'm spending some of my Scarlet and Violet dollars right here, I keep this hard-earned lesson in the back of my mind because I think it's going to help us be really, really successful. So listen, if you made it to the end of this video, I hope you enjoyed it. I have a ton of fun with this data. I think it's super valuable. And if you like the content, hit that subscribe button. If you enjoyed what you saw, give us a thumbs up. And if you have questions or comments, drop them down below. I appreciate you more than I can say. I hope you have a great one, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everybody. Bye.